Ladies and gentlemen, this is Report of the Week, and we are now on the air. We continue to discuss shortwave radio in this show. 14B, I believe it is. So, shortwave radio. What have we discussed so far? Well, here's a little recap. What you may have missed, a little refresher possibly. What have we discussed over the course of our episodes? Talked about the basics, talked about the premise of shortwave, all different signal types, AM, FM, LSB, USB, CW. We discussed how the atmosphere can pretty much control how strong or weak signal will be, depending on the time of day. We talked all about the frequency allocations, the different bands. We talked about a few examples of signals. Yesterday we talked all about the WebSDR software online, how to use it, and then we got to what I would consider to be the more interesting part of shortwave radio, and that's the stations themselves. We talked about a few renowned stations, such as the Voice of America, the BBC World Service, and China Radio International. So we'll finish this off now with two more stations that I believe are pretty well known along the shortwave bands. The first is All India Radio. That's All India Radio, also known as AIR, not to be confused with the airplanes. There's something called an AIR band, but that's for air traffic, not All India Radio. But this station is by the government of India. It was launched in 1930, and they have a large number of shortwave stations broadcasting both locally to India. Most of them you really can't hear at all. And they also have their general overseas service, where they primarily broadcast in English to varying parts of the world. That said, pretty much at any given time you really have a high likelihood of hearing them. All India Radio is a pretty decent station. They really don't have a real bias when it comes to news. However, All India Radio typically likes to discuss cultural matters and news specifically going on in India. So, in some way, they're similar to China Radio International, where they really like to focus and promote the culture of their country. For instance, here's a broadcast of All India Radio right now. You could hear them playing ethnic Indian music. Yeah, so right there, it's a powerful broadcast. That's their general overseas service, promoting, pretty much cultural Indian music to the rest of the world. Something that you really wouldn't hear anywhere else. That type of music really isn't that popular in the United States or in many other countries. However, in India, they really wish to promote their culture to the rest of the world, and I appreciate that. They have multiple stations on the airwaves at any given time. In total, it seems they have several hundred stations. I'm not sure how many they have overall. They have 256 in total. Many of them are considerably weaker, though, broadcasting only locally in India, so you really can't pick up a lot of those. Another station that is really famous on the shortwave bands, though unfortunately as of April 1st, 2014 you can't hear it anymore, was something known as the Voice of Russia. As we discussed yesterday, we talked about Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, all those stations from the US broadcasting into Eastern Europe, to spread, as they call it, democracy. This was pretty much Russia's counter to that. The Voice of Russia itself, though, I believe formed in the early 1900s. I believe it formed in the 1930s. Let me just double check the date there. The Voice of Russia actually formed in 1929. And their radio service ended April 1st, 2014. Now, the Voice of Russia was really pretty much the equivalent of the Voice of America. They promoted Russian culture, and they also basically spread the news occasionally from a Russian standpoint, especially during the Cold War. They became known as Radio Moscow, and they really severely jammed a lot of Radio Free Europe's broadcast, and also spread, their communist agenda, as some have called it, to Europe and the rest of the world. In recent years, though, they've, obviously after the fall of communism, they became pretty much just a typical traditional radio station, mostly broadcasting the news and occasionally other programs. Recently, though, they've began cutting their broadcasts. They cut a lot of frequencies back in December, and finally, as of April 1st, they completely removed the station from the airwaves. But at that point, they were really just known for their name. They didn't dominate the airwaves as China Radio International does now, but still a shame to see them go. Surprisingly enough, someone from their organization, from their website, claimed that it was Vladimir Putin who actually wished to shut them down, but that could be, whatever. It's not really a reliable source, that being said. But the Voice of Russia is definitely a very well-known shortwave station. A very prolific one, but unfortunately it is no longer broadcasting. Now, on the receiver here in Europe, there are also a few very strong stations that you may also pick up. A lot of these are straight out of Romania. They're known as Radio Romania International. These stations from Romania really have been formed in the 1920s as well. Radio Romania International is actually a part of the Romanian government. They have their own little branch there, and what they really wish to do is to promote the culture of Romania. This station was formed in 1927. They play a lot of ethnic music, mostly actually classical music, from the great composers that once lived in Romania. They have very strong stations in Europe. They broadcast in English and varying languages, and they definitely really do try to promote the culture of Romania, and to a pretty good degree they do, in a positive image. Lately the one viral video going around is that one guy, that one gang of people spinning the old lady around, and it's really a negative image of Romania. But this station definitely does do their part to try to promote the positive side of this nation, through expressing its rich culture and music as well. So I do occasionally listen to that station. They have a lot of classical music on it. It's currently not broadcasting. It usually keeps a schedule, though. I'm sure you could find it online. Usually you could hear it in the evenings in the U.S. So those were a few pretty well-known stations that you could easily find on the airwaves. As well, in the U.S., now I know a lot of you are listening from the U.S., that's obviously perfectly fine. Shortwave radio is more popular in Europe. However, there's, as some have said, an inordinate amount of stations that do broadcast in the United States. So with that being said, you have a good amount of broadcasters that are only heard primarily in the United States. Now, a lot of these broadcasters, though, and I don't know how much you would really appreciate this, a lot of these broadcasters that you might hear in the United States are religious broadcasters. These people are primarily, I'd say, Protestant, evangelical. Some of them are from those big mega churches out west, and they have their own radio stations, and they'll promote, their religious beliefs on the airwaves. Some of them are more radical than others. But with that being said, there's a real great deal of variation when it comes to broadcasting in the United States. Now, when you have all these stations broadcasting in the United States, of course not all of them are religious, but there's a lot of them. some of the best known preachers that you could probably hear at any given time in the United States. I hear these people sometimes dominating the airwaves. There's one person named Melissa Scott, I believe a pastor out of California, I believe. There's one guy named Brother Stare, he always says the world's ending. Harold Camping, they'll still play some of his recordings. He was the guy back in 2011 who said that the rapture was going to happen, though it never actually did. Back in the 70s and 80s, there were a few white supremacists who broadcasted on the airwaves, but they have all since dissipated. And there's a few commentators who also broadcast. These guys are not religious stations. Some of them do shortwave stations, shows about shortwave. There's this one guy who just does an hour-long show, I believe every Friday night, who just really takes it out on the cops and says how bad the police are in the U.S. and just takes an hour just to say that. There's this one guy who does a show, he's called the Armchair Survivalist, and he does a show saying how you could, in case something happened, in case of a disaster, how you could always be safe and what have you. So there's a lot of stations and broadcasters out there. And there's a lot of stations as well in the U.S. Now, many of the stations in the United States are privately owned broadcasters, and they have massive transmitters that could reach the entire world. These transmitters are probably just as strong as the huge broadcasters such as Voice of America and what have you. And a lot of these stations really like to just sell off their airtime to different broadcasters. So a lot of these religious preachers, what have you, a lot of them like to buy airtime on these stations, and they primarily dominate the airwaves. But anyone else who has enough money will usually buy a time slot here. They'll be played, whatever they want to say, their message will get played on the air, and then the next person will be on the air, and it usually just goes on a schedule like that. This is how all these stations make their money, by selling off their airtime to people who want to buy it. Some of these stations, most of them just have a call sign as their name, and then they have a name after that. So there's WRMI, that's Radio Miami International, from Okeechobee, Florida. They have a lot of broadcasting frequencies. I believe they have about 8 or 9 that they sell off to different people. You have WTWW, that's We Transmit Worldwide, from Lebanon, Tennessee. I've heard that station over here in Europe on the receiver there. WWCR, that's Worldwide Christian Radio from Nashville, Tennessee. You could obviously tell that they really like to play religious programming. WHRI, that's World Harvest Radio. Once again, they like to play religious programming. There's WEWN, that's a Catholic station. WBCQ, The Planet, they like to play a variety of programming, and so on and so forth. Let's just see right now if we could hear any stations, any of these stations from the U.S. broadcasting currently. So let's see what we tune into, if we could hear any of them. Alright? Let's give it a shot. Maybe we'll hear something, maybe we won't. We'll have to find out. He's talking in another language here. See what else we got here.
I say, I zero in on a generation, and then I begin to preach about this generation, a condemned generation, and you're saved in it? That's amazing.
This is the guy who always says the world's going to end. His title, again, is Brother Stare.
You try to steal all the blessings of God? Huh? You liars? I deserve it. See what I've done? Look who I is. Well, I'm here. You won't even do it now, look. You won't even say it now, look.
Oh, here's WINB.
God got it all. Whosoever put it away his wife.
People call this guy the screaming preacher for good reasons. Now, if you ever want to hear any of these stations on the receiver in Europe, a good place to hear them is usually at the very beginning or at the end of a broadcast band. A lot of these stations start actually before the broadcast band starts, or start after the broadcast band ends. So usually before or after the band is when you could pick up a lot of these stations. Like this one's playing some music, it seems. There's the Chinese jammer. So on and so forth. So those are a lot of the stations that you could find out of the U.S. Of course, you have the government broadcasters, such as the Voice of America, all their affiliates going to various countries, to promote democracy. There's this one station known as the Armed Forces Radio Network. They're kind of like an FM station where they play like the hit list and popular music and all that, except they broadcast on shortwave for the U.S. soldiers in other countries stationed abroad, and for naval ships out at sea. So they like to provide them with entertainment and music. As well, there's a few time stations. We'll cover those later when we get to utility stations. So these are just a few well-known stations coming out of the U.S. there. So, we pretty much covered the licensed broadcasters, right? The licensed. But when you have licensed broadcasters, there's of course an opposite. Those are the unlicensed broadcasters. And there are plenty of those. Now, an unlicensed broadcaster is anyone who just doesn't have a legal license from the FCC or another government group to broadcast their station legally. And these people are known as pirates. I'm sure you've heard of pirate radio. Well, this is where it comes from, and it's still very much alive today. Pirate radio at almost any given time, especially on this receiver from the Netherlands I talked all about yesterday, there's really a good chance that at any given time you could hear a pirate station. You might have heard a few already and you might not know it. But a pirate station is an illegal broadcast. That's simply what it is. Someone who has the equipment to properly do so picks out a frequency, sets up camp. It's that simple. And there's pirate stations going on right now. I could see a few. Now, if you want to hear pirate radio, first off, there's a few types of pirates. Most of them play music. They're for your entertainment. For your entertainment, and sometimes for their own entertainment. You could find the European pirates. And a lot of them you could find between 6,200 kilohertz and 7,000 kilohertz. So let's check this out and see if we could find any pirate stations, alright? There we go, already. We found one. This is a pirate station. How do you know this is a pirate station? How do I know that, no, this is just a licensed broadcaster? There's a few ways to spot a pirate station. Number one, are they anywhere near a broadcast band? If that answer is no, if they're just in the middle of nowhere between the bands, they're probably a pirate station. Number two, if they have a little label there. If they don't, they're probably a pirate station. And three, if the announcer just comes on and doesn't sound professional in the least, if he sounds like this rowdy guy, he's like yelling and stuff and sounds kind of like a fun person, probably a pirate station. And sometimes they'll just give their station a call sign or a name. You could look that up and you'll see that they're probably a pirate station. So here's one station. Here's a weaker one next to them. See if we could find any more. And these are European pirates. That's why they have decent reception. Because obviously these pirates, really don't have the massive machines and broadcasting equipment and all that stuff that the major broadcasters do. Here's one on 6950, right near the amateur band. Looks like he's having some audio issues there. The music stopped. Audio issues, or is he just messing around? Looks like audio issues. Some of these guys don't have the most professional equipment. So, pirate stations, you could find a lot of European pirates between 6,200 and 7,000. You just need to browse around, and eventually you'll find something, and you'll easily be able to pick up one. US pirates are pretty difficult to listen to here, but if you have a radio in the US, you could probably hear them. A lot of them like to broadcast between around 6,600 and 7,000 kilohertz. So if you pick up a weaker pirate there, then chances are it's probably from the US. So the European pirates like to broadcast lower down in this section, and the US pirates like to broadcast higher up. Now there's also pirates in Europe, particularly the Netherlands. They come out particularly strong here. They like to broadcast directly after the AM band. You could hear them usually after 1,611 kilohertz up into 1,810 kilohertz. So in this space you could hear a lot of AM pirates. But their music really doesn't interest me. They like to play a lot of polkas, which isn't my type of music, but here's a few. Particularly weak. There's only one pirate that I usually like to listen to here. His station's name is Radio Baroness. He is bilingual, so he speaks both English and Dutch. And he really plays a decent variety of music and always has a good personality. So I'll tune into his show. Could usually hear him on 1,611 kilohertz, usually on the weekends, like Saturday afternoons or so. Besides that, though, there's a few well-known pirate stations continuously broadcasting. There's one right here on 4029 kilohertz that broadcasts 24/7 out of Ireland. It's known as Laser Hot Hits. This is it currently. Its signal is variable, though, so it's clearly not the strongest station, but they broadcast 24/7 with music constantly. In my opinion, a pirate station like this is more like a conventional radio station if they could, just play shows 24/7 like that. Pirate radio's had a long history. It really exploded in the 1960s, we'll say. But it's still going on today, and there's pretty much a few well-known stations still going. You have Cool AM Radio, Radio Echo 1 from England. You could hear him on 6935 on the shortwave. You can hear Radio Baroness on 1611 kilohertz. Laser Hot Hits. Hot Rod Radio. Plenty more stations. There's probably, in total, I'd say there's probably several hundred pirate stations still around, but they all have their little schedules. You have some that just broadcast full-time, and you have others that just go on the weekends and transmit. So it always depends, when they really feel like broadcasting. Now, of course, at any given time, I played about 5 or 6 stations that I happen to come across. They're all legal. They could easily get arrested for broadcasting like this. It's against the law, in every country, at least. So it's against the law what they're doing, but clearly it's not really enforced at all. I believe the last real major raid against pirates was 2009. Since then, things have pretty much calmed down there. So there's really been no enforcement of the laws against radio pirates. They're not licensed stations. They pretty much play music without either A, buying the songs online, crediting the record company, what have you. So they pretty much pirate the music as well as illegally broadcasting, but regardless of what they do, the laws themselves are really not enforced, but there have been occasions where the pirate broadcasters themselves have been arrested for doing that. So I strongly discourage these guys from doing it, but they do it anyway. Now, there's plenty more unlicensed stations on the air, and some of those are regarded as oddities. Now, I've mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention it again. There's a few very famous stations on the shortwave known as numbers stations. Nobody knows the true purpose of them. I'm just going to say it like that. I'm not trying to make it sound like it's something that it's not. Simply put, nobody knows the true purpose of these stations. They're known as numbers stations. Why do people call them that? Simply put, these broadcasts will emerge out of the static. They'll last for up to several hours in length, and they'll simply spew random numbers which seem to have no pattern at all. They'll just come out. They're pretty high-powered stations. They'll transmit numbers for a period of time, and they'll sign off, and then they'll pop up somewhere else. And they've been doing this since at least World War II. Some have been believed to have been using the radio since World War I, but it's been confirmed since World War II. They've broadcast on the shortwave through the 60s, 70s, 80s. During the 90s, a lot of number stations shut down, but there's still probably about 50 or 60 that are still up and broadcasting today. Now, listening to these stations is a hobby of mine. I think it's one of the most interesting things about shortwave, simply because it's believed that they're run by different governments of different states, different governments, and it's believed that these stations are broadcasting these numbers as coded messages for spies abroad. And I just think it's very interesting to actually still hear that in this day and age. So I find that very interesting. There's such a variety of stations still out there, and I find it very interesting. Now, that being said, can you hear any of these stations right now? Well, there's not as many stations as there once were. Many of them broadcast during the daytime and late night in the United States, or at least that's when they would broadcast in Eastern Time. So I have plenty of recordings from them. So let's just start talking about the different types, and I'll play the recordings to accompany them. These number stations, once again, spew random numbers believed to be for different agents abroad. It's believed that these number stations are coming from various governments. The main countries believed to still use these stations are Russia, Poland, the Ukraine, France might still use a few, Cuba uses them, China, North and South Korea, and Vietnam. These are the stations that most actively use them, but it's believed that there may be many more coming from other nations. So, the number stations, there's three types of number stations out there. You have voice stations, which are probably the most recognizable ones. They'll simply spew out the numbers in various languages through voice. You have Morse code stations, which will transmit the numbers via Morse code. Then you have digital stations, which transmit their numbers through various modes, usually digital, which you would have to hear with special software. And then there's noise stations, which may not even be number stations. They just make noise, and it's possible that numbers may be transmitted through them. So let's start off with voice stations. Now, tomorrow we're going to be discussing some of the older number stations, but right now we'll be talking about the stations currently on the air. So all the stations I'll play for you could hear at any given time. 1. English. So we're going to start off with English. Now the main languages that you could hear number stations in are English, German, Slavic, and other. Other usually, contains all the Asian languages and dialects that some stations in Asia transmit in. There's a lot of English stations. Currently there's only one German station left. There's multiple Slavic stations out there, and there's a lot of other stations out there. So we'll start off with English. Now each station is given a certain ID based off of the language. So this one is E06, that's the 6th English station, and this is an active station. So this is what this station sounds like.
0, 0, 0, 3, 7, 6, 3, 7, 6, 3, 7, 6, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Now this is no message actually, and we'll explain to you how they work specifically tomorrow. Right now we're just getting to know the active stations.
3, 7, 6, 3, 7.
Now this station has been around for a long time. It was first recorded in 1990 by an amateur, and it has still been around today. This is another recording of the station with a message. Now, just a brief little note here, you could tell immediately if the station has a message or not, in one way. While you're listening to the broadcast, if you hear it say 0, 0, 0, 0 over and over again, that means there's no message today. That's like the universal sign for no message. It goes for every station. If it's just saying random groups of numbers, it's telling you a message. It's telling its intended recipient a message. So this is the same station, E06, with a message.
1, 5, 0, 3, 6, 8, 0, 4, 9, 6, 8, 0, 4, 9, 7, 3, 1, 4, 8, 7, 3, 1, 4, 8, 2, 0, 4, 6, 2, 2, 0, 4, 6, 2, 6, 3, 5, 6, 4, 6, 3, 5, 6, 4.
And you could notice how it's repeating the groups of numbers.
1, 5, 3.
So this is one station, E06, as commonly regarded. The next station that's still broadcasting today is E07. E07. This one I actually played for you a little bit yesterday. Russian station has a nice, pleasant little British accent. This also has a message.
1, 6, 4, 1, 9, 8, 3, 8, 9, 3, 2, 4, 0, 6, 4, 8, 2, 8, 3, 6, 0, 6, 7, 3.
So that's E07. It's believed to be a Russian station broadcasting in English. Now, this station actually has a variant to it, E07A. It broadcasts with a slightly different sounding voice,
0, 0,
a little deeper voice,
1,
and it also uses SSB mode, whereas E07 uses full AM.
1, 8, 8, 0, 0, 0, 1, 8, 8, 1, 8, 8.
So that's E07A. Another station, this one believed to be coming out of Poland. This also has a variant. It's known as E11. And it has a variant known as E11A. Here it is, E11. So this is E11A. I'll explain to you tomorrow what the whole oblique thing is. It repeats this for a little while. Now, this station is characteristic of its pronunciation of certain numbers. Instead of 9, it says niner or nino. And this is from Poland. I actually recorded this one earlier today. So it always starts off its message with attention, and then it starts spewing the numbers.
7 4 0 4 4 4 4 0 4 4 4 9 3 4 3 3 9 3 4 3 3 3 3 4.
Now, people may have portrayed number stations as having like this creepy musical beginning and whatnot. A lot of stations in the 90s and 80s and even early 2000s did have a musical component at the beginning. They would usually play a song or something before they would start their message. Nowadays, though, we're focusing on the ones that broadcast today. No stations in the in Europe, at least, play music at all. There's also a new station, actually, that came out, believed to be related to the Crimean conflict. This one is known as E907B. It's a temporary title, and it's been only broadcasting for about a month. It uses the same voice as E06, the first station I played you, but it uses the message format as E07A. So it combines the two together, so it's kind of a hybrid of the both. This is one of the only, I think this is one of 2 recordings of the station. So you go. And don't complain about these recordings. Don't go saying that I stole them, because every recording I've played you thus far, I have recorded. So please keep that in mind. And then there's a few more English stations. There's one out of Egypt, which I have not recorded yet. I believe you can only pick that up in certain areas of the globe. So I have yet to pick that up. And then there's also another one known as E17Z. And that's out of Ukraine. So this station, I'm sure, is probably a little more active now, you know, of everything that's going on in that poor country. E17Z, as commonly regarded. Here's a message. Broadcasts in English, of course, for the E.
6 7 4 6 7 4 6 7 4 6 7 4.
Skipping ahead to the message.
0 8 4 1 1 6.
The characteristic, instead of saying 1, it says van.
1 6 5 3 7 8 1 5 3, 7, 8, 1, 7, 8, 9, 2, 4, 7, 8, 9, 2, 4, 3, 4, 6, 9, 4, 3, 4, 6, 9, 4.
So this station is E17Z. Now, all the stations have their little names, you know, E06, E07, E11, you know, E17Z, E25. All of these stations have their little names. Who gave these names? Certainly not the governments. No government has ever formally acknowledged the existence of number stations. Now, there's various groups and tracking organizations of number stations. The most main group is a group known as Enigma 2000. They have a website. They produce a newsletter every 2 months. I diligently read it. And they're the people who have organized all these stations into categories based off of their language. If a station broadcasts in English, it has a little E in front of it, and then, based off of the date that it was found, it's given a number. Same thing. If it's a German station, if it broadcasts in German, then it'll have a little G in front of it, and it'll be given a number. Same thing. If it broadcasts in a Slavic language, it will be given an S, and it'll have a little number. And all the little letters, some of them have an A next to it, a B, a C, what have you. That only means that it's a variant of the original station in some way, shape, or form. It might have a different voice, it might have a different format to the message, but it's definitely related to the main station. Well, this is VORW, the voice of the report of the week. Today we continued our discussion on shortwave radio. We talked about, some more prolific AM stations, talked about pirate stations, and now we start our discussion on number stations. Today we covered some types of broadcast number stations, some types of number stations broadcasting in English. Tomorrow we'll talk about the rest of the number stations, give a brief history of stations that are not broadcasting anymore. We'll talk about some speculation with them and all that. Hope you have a good day. This is the Report of the Week, signing off. Take care.